Let me ask you this question, brother. You are always in Africa. You got the African Day Parade. You don't see the Africans. You got the festival that be going on in Brooklyn, the band festival, the African festival. Where's the Africans at? When we doing our rallies and our marches, where's the Africans at on your side? Talk to us really about that, man.
See, let me tell you something. We think slavery in America was something. Slavery in Africa is still in force. You talking about deaf, blind, and dumb. Don't confuse you because somebody got on some printed cloth that's printed in Holland or
Greetings to you and welcome to today's special reactional video. You know, I deem it such an honor and a privilege and a blessing, to react to this particular special video of uh, the most honorable Professor James Small. You know, if I were to state one man that has helped me, you know, in my journey to self discovery, in my journey to knowledge of self, in my journey to self consciousness, and in my journey to actually, uh, you know, understanding myself and my place in this world as a black person or as an African. I would say it is no other person than Professor James Small. You know, he's that man, he's that great man that has helped me restore my consciousness and that has helped me actually to actually fall in love with myself, because the only way through which you love yourself is when you know yourself. And to know yourself means that you need to know yourself in and out, right? Which includes your personal, but more especially also your history. I mean, your personal history as an individual, meaning your family lineage and whatever, but more especially the culture of your people. That is very, very important. And no other person, no other revolutionist or Pan Africanist taught me this than Professor James Small, because most of the other Pan Africanists and most of the other revolutionists and activists or whatever you may want to call them, or conscious speakers, all right, most of them, most African conscious speakers are often, interested in the political aspect of things. All right, most of them are in the political aspect of things, and some were even in the religious aspect of things. But Professor James Small is the exception. He, in my opinion, is the complete professor that I've listened to, you know, so far. With all due respect to all the other ancestors and even living activists, who risk their life, to conscientize Africans and Black people in general, and to actually, you know, help us, develop ourselves, right, as a people. With all due respect to all of them, I think one of the key limitations that most of them have is the lack of, should I say, the lack of spiritual and cultural consciousness. You see, so and this can be said of most of the great African leaders that we've had in the past. Okay, and even be it on the African continent, people like our Nkrumah of Ghana, people like, you know, Thomas Sankara of Burkina Faso, people like Jomo Kenyatta. Of course, Jomo Kenyatta, he had the spiritual consciousness. I would say to some extent, I'm here to read more about him. But he said, when the white man came to Africa, they gave us the Bible and asked us to pray. As we close our eyes to pray, they took away our resources, enslaved us, and what have you. And we now had the Bible in hand. So I would say maybe Jomo Kenyatta. I'm here to read more into his cultural life as a leader, you know, or should I say his spiritual life as a leader, whether he was a true conscious, you know, African leader in terms of, let's say, cultural consciousness. This is what I mean, right? Or but I think he's maybe one of the few, right? But most of them, in Nkrumah, for instance, he actually ignited a fire for the independence of most African states, right? Though he actually got that consciousness from the states, people like W.E. Du Bois and people like, Professor James Small were the ones that helped. Um, it was thanks to, their activism and works that, people like Nkrumah were able to be cultured and, educate, to come and fight for Africa, right? We all know that history. So, but what I wanted to say was that Nkrumah, for instance, lacked the cultural consciousness, if I may say. Of course, he was a great leader. He fought for our independence. He inspired people like Sekou Toure, named them Patrice Lumumba of Congo, and many other leaders, Thomas Sankara and what have you, revolutionists that we've had, all right? But most of these leaders, including Nkrumah, they do not see the importance of the cultural consciousness, and say if you have to say cultural, then you have to talk about the spiritual consciousness, right? African spirituality and its importance in government and in all aspects. We can talk about the Haitian Revolution. It was actually carried out what in African spiritual system, you know, right? Voodoo was part of it, all right? That is who we are. We are a spiritual people, and that element is very, very important because when you leave your culture, and as a matter of fact, it's not just all about spirituality. You see, uh, the cultural. You see, we often confuse things. We often think like religion is apart, and then the culture of the people is apart. That's what they make us believe, so that they can subjugate us. And by subscribing to foreign religions means that we simply what? Subscribe to their ways of life and their culture and turn our backs to our ancestors and our way of living, you see. But if we are to leave the spiritual aspect aside, within your culture, in addition to your religion, which is found within your culture, you would also find what? Your politics, that defines which political system you are to adopt. That's why, for instance, Saudi Arabia, they have kingdoms. Most Africans were actually kingdoms, all right? Before the introduction of Western democracy after slavery and colonialism, we were having what? Kingship, all right? And so within your culture, you would find your religion, which is the African spirituality. Some may call it voodoo, some may call it, in my language, Dagari, we call it Sankono. You know, Dagari is a northern Ghanaian language, and it's just people of Dagati or Dagari are also found in Burkina Faso and even in Cote d'Ivoire, right? Um, in Twi in Ghana, I don't know what we call. I do speak Twi, but I don't know how we call. Uh, some would say it'll come later. I don't. I would teach you Twi in another video. But let's stick to the topic. All right. But I just wanted to say that within your culture, you would find your politics, you find your spirituality or your religion is found within your culture, but they fool us to think that religion is apart. Okay, religion is just apart, and then the people's culture is apart. So that has reduced our cultural consciousness to just wearing of clothes. Meaning that's why he's saying if you are wearing a piece of cloth painted in Holland that was sold to us and termed as African wear, you know, then you would think you are culturally African, but you have no cultural African cultural values. You have no African cultural African spirituality is not within you. You are practicing a foreign religion. You have no in terms of your politics, you are not abiding or going by any African system of governance. Your constitution is not based on was not designed by our ancestors or whatever. You know, your currency is actually printed elsewhere. Your what else can I name? Just name it. Our marriage systems. The lady has to wear a wig or a weave. They have to wear weaves, take off their natural hair, and then paint their faces and put on white garment as if just to look as much as possible as the European or the white person because of the colonial mindset. This is the damage that culture, the lack of cultural integrity, causes. You see. So this is our current state as a people. So within your culture, all these elements are there, you know, name them. So it was people like Professor James Small that made me understand that, as if somebody aspires to be an African leader or to be a leader, then for a person to be complete, the fellow should have, in addition to geopolitics, the fellow should have what African consciousness and should know the importance of African spirituality in, as an important component of what leadership. You see, so it's people like Professor James Small that gave me this consciousness. And he is actually into deep research into African culture. He's often in Ghana. He's actually initiated, as a traditional priest, in many different African spiritual systems. So he's a very powerful man spiritually and consciously, politically and everything. That's why I'm saying he's complete, but it doesn't mean all those other leaders who fought the political struggle were not smart as he is. That's not what I'm trying to say. As a matter of fact, most of those leaders probably, it also depends on the era because at that time, it was like people were trying to free themselves from slavery. So you resort to just the physical and political aspects of things. You would not pay the attention to these other aspects. You see, but Haiti is a good example. They incorporated this. They actually were able to lead a full revolution, and that led to Haiti actually freeing themselves and becoming the first black nation to regain its independence. Right. So it's people like Professor James Small that really helped me understand this very well. So I think I've taken a lot of time to speak about who he is, all right, and why I admire him so much, all right. So now we continue on the video, and in this particular video, he's talking about, you know, why, like he's trying to describe the relationship between Africans and what African Americans. Like, why is it that uh, we often have issues? For instance, when Africans immigrate to the US to meet their African brothers, you know, who have been there centuries ago, right? Why is there always this sometimes misunderstanding between us as a people, So he's trying to say basically that um, Let me play the video so we'll get to understand why. All right. Let me play the video.
Or India, that you're looking at an African cultural expression. That's not an African cultural expression. That cloth was printed in a European country and then sold to Africans. And they've accepted that as their cloth. You understand what I'm saying? Just that piece. Now, they do speak the language, but they know less about their history than you and I do. So you've got a deaf.
And that is an absolute fact. If you want the most conscious African, he himself said it, all right? The most conscious African or black person in this world is the African American or the African, the West Indian African, Jamaican, uh, Trinidadian, name them, right? Guadeloupean. These are the people that are actually conscious, you know, and they actually love Africa more than Africans on the African continent. I can tell you that Black Americans, they love Africa more than. I can give an example later on. For instance, when I was working in hotel as a receptionist, anytime I welcome an African American brother, like the love is pure. He recognizes me straight away as his brother. And even if he's to ask me what this is, while I was schooling here in France, I used to work part time in during the weekend, in hotels as luggage keeper and those kind of things. And anytime I welcome an African brother from America, he's going to treat me like a king. Even if he wants information from the reception, he's going to ask me. The tips, I don't even need to talk about that, but it's not just about the money, but how they just treat me is so warming, right? You know, and you really feel like there's somebody that is conscious compared to a brother that is coming from Ghana or Nigeria or Sierra Leone or any part of Africa as a tourist, because he would explain, okay, he's saying the key reason why sometimes we have these issues of misunderstanding between us is simply because the African from the African continent is somebody that is backwards. Sorry to say, in a sense that, like I was saying, we lack cultural consciousness as a people. So sometimes just the mere fact that we speak the language doesn't mean that we are conscious. Of course, some of us have made some efforts to learn, right? Thanks to the internet to get to know ourselves, but we know very little of our own history. So an African American is interested in African history right from ancient Egypt, you know, right from ancient Egypt down to, I don't know, like right from ancient Egypt down to our modern day history. They know everything about it. But the African on the African continent, I'm sorry, he doesn't know anything about it. Even his own family history, he doesn't know. So this is not trying to throw shade. As a matter of fact, as an African, I don't really care about, am I a Ghanaian? I'm a Senegalese. I'm just an African, right? So this is not to disrespect Africans or something because I grew up in Ghana personally, but it is the truth that he's saying. Most of us are dumb, like we don't know anything about our history and we were never taught in schools and we have always been brainwashed by, the foreign religions, where they teach us individualism, like just pray and go to heaven, see your brother as an enemy and somebody that is trying to attack you and pray against him and only dream of heaven, political consciousness, cultural consciousness. If you talk about your own culture, you might get beat down in the street. Let's listen to him.
Backwards person speaking an African language, coming from the African country, came here to be a parasite on their own people with no respect for themselves as human beings, and then because they speak a language, try to make you play you off like they got something culturally that you don't have. The most culturally enforced African in the world is the African American. most of the movements that have changed the world that allow all ethnic nations to profit has been our movement. And so we get peed on and played down because these people are so punked out and scared of the white man that they feel because they're scared of the white man, they got to be against us. You
Are
know?
they our people, brother, or
Yeah,
are we
no.
our own people
No,
now?
no.
See, so personally, okay, I feel like even the African governments are doing very little when it comes to actually reunifying, okay, because we were once the same people until slavery came in and took our ancestors to the West Indies and to the Americas, right? So I feel like our African leaders are actually doing very little when it comes to bridging this gap and bringing us, more closer. And I think some nations are making some efforts. Ghana, for instance, currently as we speak, as a Ghanaian, I don't need a visa to go to Jamaica, Trinidad, and many other Caribbean countries, right? And Barbados too. I think the same thing can be said for, I don't know whether Ethiopia, I'm not sure, because Haile Selassie being the first king to have ever visited Jamaica, and that's why they say Rastafarians worship or see Haile Selassie as a god, being the only first black African leader to have visited the Caribbean, you know, because most all other kings and leaders in Africa actually dejected or rejected and turned their back to these ancestors and descendants of them that were taken, overseas. But Haile Selassie was the first man to. So I'm not sure. Probably Ethiopia to offer such possibilities. So Jamaican can just come to Ghana without a visa or something. Yes, and we can also go there. And we need more of this. But we need, we need to do more in terms of actually honoring the memory of those ancestors that were taken, right? This should be like a year. Can you imagine in Ghana that we don't have actually a public holiday? Or if I'm wrong, if a Ghanaian is watching this video, he can correct me. We don't have a public holiday that is dedicated to celebrating. Let me not say celebrating as if it's something beautiful that happened, but that is dedicated to remembering those ancestors that were taken overseas. I don't think we have a public holiday for that. If I'm wrong, somebody should correct me. But we have Pentecost Day, public holiday. We have Christmas holiday. We have all the foreign holidays, European holidays. We actually observe them in Africa. Can you imagine this? Just think about it. Think about it for a minute. If you had a child and this child was taken from you forcefully, all right, would you not honor that child? Would you not have a day where you remember that child? Now, if this child that was taken was able to survive and has descendants who are living somewhere, won't you try to bridge the gap and reunify? Even China is trying to do it with Taiwan. you know, how more like why Africans like why we can do better. So I think our leaders are doing very little, and that is because, as he's explaining, Africans on the African continent, we suffered our part of, the brainwashing. The brainwashing is actually universal on all African people, all right? Because not all African Americans or West Indian Africans are all conscious. I've met people, for instance, from the West Indies, like Guadeloupe, yeah. When I try to show my Africanness and the unity as one African, or let's say just that, try to, they were like they were so furious and unhappy about me trying to to remind me of their Africanness, right? Because some of them were told that Africans sold them out to slavery, which is not true. You see, that maybe I would make a video one day to talk about that, how it happened, but it is not true that Africans sold their brothers and sisters out into slavery. It was never, that is not true. And so the brainwashing is on both sides, right? Besides, Africans, those left on the continent were fighting for their own freedom. They had their own share of the oppression. But of course, uh, not it wouldn't be as compared to those that were forcefully taken to go and work as slaves. And that is the more reason why. Besides, we are on the motherland. That's why we say the motherland. So we have to put more work in terms of actually creating this unification and possible repatriation. So let's continue.
We got to understand two things. We have a race and then we have an ethnic place. We ethnically we African Americans. Just like a guy from Africa, he can say he's African, but there's no country called African. He's either Nigerian, Ghanaian, Malian, or that's his ethnic nation. Racially, we are together, but economically, we may well be enemies. And we have to be clear on that. That our economic enemy is just that. And if you deal with your economic enemy like it's your friend, you're going to be the loser at the end of the day. Now, we raised the question of Pan-Africanism in this hemisphere.
You see, so I think this part of the video is simply a message to those Africans who immigrate to the US or into Europe or wherever, right? When they are just simply reminding us that we need to have some respect. This is not to say I am no, like I said, I am an African, universal African, right? It's not about continental Africans versus African Americans or West Indian Africans. That's not it. You see, so but it is simply an advice to us that we need to learn. Today with the internet, we have no excuse. It is just a matter of opening up your mind and your willingness to learn your culture and your history to know yourself. You see, for me, what's triggered my journey to self discovery and to African consciousness was after listening to the song Payday, okay, Payday by Culture Joseph Hills, where he says, when will be the slaves pay the Mr. Slave Driver, that song, right? You raped my grandmother in the hills and called her a prostitute. That was the song that gave me, some understanding of what slavery was like for our ancestors that were taken there. Because in Africa, they never teach us our history and culture in an Afrocentric perspective. You see, besides, most of those courses like social studies would be done at the elementary school. And at that time, you are still learning even the English language in school. And the teacher is teaching you some of these things in English, which you don't even understand. And this is why I'm saying Professor James Small is the one that really gives a complete solution to African problems. Well, he actually talks more about the importance of culture. Imagine that we were learning in our own languages. It means that you would understand things much better. They would explain things to you to understand that, what, my grandfather was ever taken. My father used to even give us the oral history of our ancestors, some of them, my grandparents on the farm. And most of the people that were taken from Ghana were actually northern Ghanaians. You see, and these are people like my ancestors. Some of them will be on the farm and they'll come and chase them and grab some of them, chain them, and ship them to Accra or the Cape Coast, the southern part, to be shipped as slaves. The history goes on and on and on. So this simply tells us that we need to do more, right? One of the reasons why African Americans sometimes find it hard to get along with us is because they have been raped of their culture, right? So they cannot speak the language, they don't have their names. And even that's what I'm saying, we just have to understand each other mutually, because African Americans may not understand that even Africans on the African continent, they suffer the same kind of mental slavery and brainwashing. So Africans on the African continent don't, most of them are bearing foreign names. You see, if the fellow is a Christian, he's most good likely going to have a European name. If he is a Muslim, then he's going to have an Arab name. This is the case. All right. And those who are conscious, who are proudly African, practice bearing their African names or practicing the African spirituality and everything, are mocked upon. You see, he said it right here he will say it right here in this particular video. So when an African American meets you as an African who immigrated to the States, he expects to meet a brother that would treat him, that would remind him that, you know what, this is I'm so sorry and I'm so happy to meet you, my brother, because you are one of me, that was taken years back, and I'm so honored to meet you. Let's team up. Most Africans wouldn't do that. Most Africans would do the shittiest jobs, right? All that they want is how to get money, like he's saying, without dignity and self-respect, right? So even when, for instance, African Americans are trying to riot, to go out there, and defend a cause or whatever, they are going to go and do their shitty jobs and fill their pockets, and they would not even support, the struggle. Meanwhile, if we are to talk of African independence, we actually owe it to what these brothers, you see, because like I said, even Nkrumah being the first African leader to initiate the independence process, he was actually prepared by people like W.E. Du Bois and co. to actually go and fight, help lead a political struggle for independence and all of that. You see,
We had the brothers from Trinidad, and then you had W.B. Du Bois, and we created this phenomena. But Africa has never created a Pan-African movement. You understand? Africa has never really supported a Pan-African movement. We had a couple of people in Nkrumah and Julius Nyerere and Mugabe, but most of Africa never gave a damn about a Pan-Africanism because they're still bogged down in the colonial slavery of European Judeo-Christian indoctrination, which is worse than anything that we've suffered. Worse than anything that we've suffered. The illusion of the clothes and the language make us think we're dealing with somebody that has some African purity culturally and spiritually. You're dealing with a confused, backwards Christian that love Europe more than they love their own ancestors. They would not even use an African word for God. In Ghana, if you talk about being a traditional African, you might get beat down in the street. You understand? You're ostracized on the radio. Movies are made to show African culture as being the devil, while Christian culture is coming in as the savior. This is TV shows and on TV in Nigeria and Ghana every day.
well, you heard it all. Whether you're an African watching this video or you're an African American, I think we just need to understand that, just as this elder and grandpa said, Professor James Small, slavery is still reinforced in Africa. Mental slavery, for that matter, you see, and all other forms of slavery is still going on. So we should just have some compassion and understand that we just need each one teach one. That is the way forward, and we should have patience and some compassion. If not, I mean, when we are divided at the end of the day, who wins? None of us is going to win. We are only going to make the work easier for the oppressor. That is how it is. They actually want to see us divided and, fighting among ourselves. You see, So we should just understand that it is unfortunate, but that is we just need to understand and have some compassion for each other. Anyway, thank you so much for watching, and please remember to subscribe, hit the like button, and share your comments and remarks within the comment section. Black love.